following program is brought to you by the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets at University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business. Welcome to the Ink Tank. Stay with us to get the inside scoop about technologies that could disrupt and challenge the way you do business.
Hello, I'm Christina Elson, and on this edition of the Ink Tank, we'll be discussing the extent to which artificial intelligence can create transparency and influence opinions. AI is a powerful provider of information, but should we also use it to predict an individual's behavior? Our guest today, Mark Walsh, is well positioned to talk about these issues. Mark is an activist, a businessman, and a founder of Facts Squared, a real-time transparency engine. Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for being with me today in the Ink Tank.
Great to be here.
Let's start off with just sort of grounding you in your perspective on AI. So there's a lot of talk about where AI is going, how quickly we're heading towards general intelligence AI, what the ramifications of that could be. So where are you in this sort of AI discussion? Are you an AI optimist? What would you love to see happen?
Would you expand the question? That just doesn't seem broad enough. Well, I tell folks that the terms AI and machine learning are often twisted, interchangeable. And I tell folks they're the two most amazing oxymorons of all time, because intelligence is not artificial and machines don't learn. However, that being said, I'm somewhere in the middle of the road on both scared out of my mind and like stupendously enthusiastic because it'll change the world. And I think most people that are paying attention are somewhere around where I am, to be blunt. It is easy to become stupendously scared,
yes,
because as my team and I often would argue, the acceleration of AI and its capacity and even the way it's being interwoven into our lives is itself accelerating. So you almost can't keep up with what's going on. That being said, when it's used in interesting, sometimes mundane ways, it makes an amazing difference in how we lead our lives, from, the traffic here in the Beltway in Washington, D.C., and managing kind of infrastructural things like that. At the same time, what can be scary is that it's very predictive. And most people don't like to be thought of as being predictive. And when you see AI actually predict what you're going to do, and then you're like, damn, I was going to do that, it's disconcerting. So whenever a machine figures out what you were going to do, that's very disconcerting. From cookies back in 2002 when they knew where we were surfing, to today when a machine can predict which product we're going to take off the shelf at Starbucks or what kind of car we're going to buy. Those types of trends can be as I say, disconcerting. And I think the less you know about it, the more upset it makes you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, a lot of the talk around where AI is going, there are certain metrics that everyone's looking at. So AI now can be predictive in terms of perhaps behavior. AI can't necessarily write a great poem. It can't necessarily do a good story or put together a beautiful movie. So this idea between what an algorithm can do and then what we would need yet another leap to get to for AI to be able to really make it a little nerve-wracking, where it really can do things that people also can do on some level, is a interesting question. But when we're talking about where you are, you're looking at things that are inherently tied to journalism, to transparency of information. So you have a background both as an activist, as a journalist, as a business person. And in that area, AI it's fascinating because you really can see it starting to have an impact on not only what we know, but perhaps what we can tell others. So perhaps you can dig a little deeper into that.
So the two marketplaces that I would argue are most sensitive and most desirous of predictive behavior are financial services and politics. If the folks who own a stock of a company could tell how nervous the company was about its future performance, they would sell the stock. Or if the company was hiding good news, they would buy the stock. And in reverse, if the company knew what kind of questions the analyst was going to ask at the quarterly earnings calls, they could prepare for those questions. So this sort of interactive, fog of not knowing when AI can clarify that and make more transparent, stupendously huge impact on the financial services industry. Same with politics, both in the election and in legislation. So if I knew what were the hot buttons for voters in Southern Virginia and I was Tim Kaine running for Senate again, I would hit those hot buttons. If I knew what would make people upset about me, Tim Kaine running for office, or I forgot the other his opponent, which maybe shows the tilt. So in political in elections, knowing the issues that matter to you or to me or to groups of people like me, look back to 2016, the use of Facebook by at least one of the candidates.
Right.
So those two marketplaces, election and politics and financial services, are two natural candidates for this idea of transparency that AI can create more and more of. And then I'll finish with this kicker, which is what AI or machine learning are really just sort of algos. Or when you say algos, it shows you're cool. If you say algorithms, it shows you're uncool. So there's your tip of the day. So the algos that are coming out really are becoming almost like lie detectors. And that's a horrible phrase because a lie detector is a very scary phrase. People think of, being caught and stuff. But if I know a lot about you, if I hear 5,000 or more words of you speaking, and I can analyze those 5,000 plus words, be it on a YouTube video or here in a conversation like this, or even the way you write, the adjectives you choose, the adverbs you choose, and extemporaneous stuff, I can start to build a profile of you that is remarkably correct. Now, that's not a lie detector because a lie detector is a one-time, where a detective is saying, where were you the night of Tuesday, whatever. But if I can build a profile on you, the more you say, the more you do, the more you interact with the profile, the smarter it gets. So the beauty of AI is it's self-correcting to some extent. That if I think I know something about you and then you do something different, well, then I put that into the algo and it gets a little smarter. So self-healing software is really what ends up looking like AI. And applied to people, I'll tell you, it can be really, really scary.
The point that you're making in terms of how AI can compile information about someone, but then we want to talk about who's going to take that information, make decisions about it, right? So it's one thing to think about how we might want to target someone to encourage them to buy something or even vote a certain way. It can become a little different when we're thinking about making decisions about what that person should or perhaps should not be doing. So should a person who has a particular kind of profile be allowed, for example, to hold a particular job or to run for office or things of that nature? That's where I think what you're saying, it can get a little creepy because there is a decision-making process in there somewhere that has to happen outside of the AI, right? And based on the context.
Algos are written by people.
Yep.
And people cannot remove the implicit bias of their psyche in how they write the code. Mm-hmm. There's an old joke, it happens to be true, that given a sample size large enough, there is a direct correlation between shoe size and IQ.
Yes.
Because a 3-year-old has a lower IQ, right? So outcomes are not necessarily pinned to inputs that make sense. But to the point of your question, Joseph Stalin once famously said, "It's not about who votes; it's about who counts the votes." Right?
That's right.
And it's not about who builds the algorithm. It's not about how the choices are made about whether someone should hold public office or whether someone should be a school teacher, whether someone should be a Boy Scout leader, or whether someone should be an auto mechanic based upon something we figure out about them. It's who decides what the figuring out is. So the old phrase, "Who will watch the watchers?" This is where my fear comes in. You can make an algo pretty much say anything you want.
Sure.
And it can look incredibly logical,
Yep.
Hence my IQ shoe size. It makes sense. A computer was once asked, which would you rather have, a watch that loses 1 second every week or a broken watch? And it said a broken watch because it's correct twice a day. The other watch is not. Now, of course, these are the absurd examples in the bell curve of what we're talking about. But they're not that far out in the bell curve where you're going to start to see them creep into the center of the bell curve and see these types of AI-based or machine learning-based decisions start to intrude upon our day-to-day. And I'll finish with this because I think you sort of brought it up implicitly. If I wanted to coach youth soccer, what kind of test will AI, pardon me, soon ask of me so that I can pass and be a youth soccer coach? Mm-hmm. If it's for a co-ed team, is it for an all-boy team, or is it for an all-girl team? Has there been anything in my past? Is there anything about the way I answer a question with micro tremor analysis for tension in my voice, the way my speech increases to a higher level, showing nervousness when I'm asked about something that's personal? I mean, I think we're seeing this in the daily conversation, both political and business and educational and athletics. We're seeing these outcomes where a machine is going to be used to test, in many ways, whether you or I can do a job. And, that gets kind of to be a bummer.
Yeah, it gets a little creepy. And I mean, clearly, we can't always know everything. I think we're sitting here in an unfolding news cycle around things that, we can look and dig, and there's some things that just aren't going to come up, right? So it's not complete information, but it's definitely a lot of information. But
an algorithm with incomplete information can make the same kind of conclusion as with complete information. That's sort of the point.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about facts squared. And I one of the things that really intrigued me is that you had mentioned that this is a startup that you're doing, and you were able in some ways to use what you referred to as off-the-shelf AI as part of this. And so as a business person and someone who, is working with small businesses, has a lot of experience there, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what is this off-the-shelf AI? How are you using it, and how do you think other business people can start to think about the opportunities in this space as well?
So there are 3 rules in technology that that I would argue are always true. Mm-hmm. 3 rules are always true. Open beats closed, simple beats hard, and cheap beats expensive. Okay? Open, easy, and cheap always beat closed, hard, and expensive. And I don't care what software program, what technology, those always end up being true. There may be different timelines on how they're true, but they're always true. So the reason I say off the shelf is a company like mine, or any company that's trying to build some new ways of addressing a marketplace, is never going to compete with Google or Microsoft or with Oracle or any of the big dogs. What they call FANG now. Facebook, Amazon. I'm forgetting all the Netflix is Apple, and then G for Google.
Right.
So stay away from the FANG. That's basically what most people have concluded. So when I say off the shelf, again, a goofy analogy, but it's like a restaurant. Jose Andres takes carrots and other ingredients and makes an incredible dish. But it's the same carrot that I may bring home to my lovely bride, and she and I make a crappy stew. Or maybe I make the crappy stew is a better way to phrase it. My point is that the ingredients can be the same, the outcomes can be dramatically different. And that's usually with the way the ingredients are mixed and a variety, I'll stay with this analogy, spices and heat and all that.
Keep going.
So the idea of off-the-shelf AI implies code that's written by way better financed and way smarter people who tend to live way away from here to the East Coast. And that code is a set of building blocks that when you combine them and you have them bounce off each other and sometimes compete with each other. So we have, in our company, we will compete with different transcription engines from various sources, and which one is best. We call it Thunderdome from the movie, Mad Max movie, where 2 men enter and 1 man leaves. So sort of Thunderdome for technology. That way you're using the best of incredibly well-financed tech giants, and you're applying it in a minimalist, hopefully competitive way to smaller applications like our company.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that business people should be asking those kinds of vendors when they're looking at acquiring these tools? Because, not really knowing, okay, what are the algs behind how they products have been developed? Are they continuously improving and learning on them? Am I getting something that doesn't necessarily have a lot of bias inherent in it? I mean, what should you know as an executive when you're trying to really evaluate how to pick and choose these things?
So I guess the bad answer is nothing. I mean, there's sort of, if I called up, I guess Eric Schmidt is gone. I used to know Eric Schmidt back in the day at Google, now Alphabet. But if I called up Satya Nadella, who actually was on the board of a company that I ran, but way back in the day at Microsoft, or I called up the heads of Alphabet, Larry Page, or so, whatever name you would toss, whatever, gargantuan king of technology, or any of their direct reports or any of their divisional managers or whatever, and tried to say, gee, could you twist this algo so it does that? I mean, they're going to laugh, right? So We're just the poor minions out here in the trenches. So to the point of your original question, I guess the original point of your question, there's not a lot. There's a huge gap between what they do and what folks like my team is going to make. The difference is in the closer in to us, and that is, as I mentioned, how do you build engines that compare these softwares to each other?
Okay.
Because if you're a total Google shop, or you're a total Oracle shop, or you're a total Microsoft shop, which is fine, which is what they want, by the way, you are locked into the way they see the world.
Yep.
And they do see the world a certain way. And I would encourage everybody visiting this to go out and take a tour of one of the headquarters of those companies, because they'll give them. You'll see a worldview. So what I think is important for smaller companies that are using technologies off the shelf is to constantly test them against each other. And you can do it in very simple ways. You can do it in more complex ways. And there are off-the-shelf pieces of software that can help you compare. I'm spacing on some of the names, so I can't recommend any. But that's sort of my point, is you don't stay inside a silo. Shop around. And the more you shop, the more sometimes you'll find edge stuff that the companies are doing, trying new stuff in beta. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, we have a great relationship with many of the silos that I mentioned before, and sometimes they're calling us and saying, "We're thinking of this. Would you try this out?" Now, you know, we're a little company, but it is kind of neat to try beta and sometimes alpha stuff, because then you become a feedback loop for them.
Yeah, so that's really great, because that sort of gets at this idea that they're very cognizant, a lot of these companies, of disruption, of how they themselves could be disrupted, and trying to figure out how to be innovative and also look for what small, more agile, maybe more nimble people are doing is perhaps a win-win, at least hopefully has been for you and for what you're doing.
Yeah, then they buy us, which would be a huge win-win.
That's a win too, right? Yeah.
Please, if you're out there.
Right.
No, it's yes. It, to your point.
Yeah.
Let's take Google. So Google didn't get to where it was by deciding it knew everything. In fact, it got where it was today by deciding that they knew nothing, and they hire brilliant, twisted people. And I say twisted because that's probably true. And they make up stuff all day. 24/7, they're making stuff up. And it's pasta against the wall. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Now, just as an aside, they happen to be the luckiest corporation on the planet, because 96% of their revenue comes from one brilliant thing called Google AdWords, which is when you and I search on Google, for hunting boots, or I don't know if you're buying hunting boots, but they have the auction of who's up front. Yep. Fabulous business, makes $1 gazillion a day. And that gives them the ability, it affords them the ability to try all sorts of other stuff. Mm-hmm. And they're slowly creeping into the other silos, because if you use Gmail or Google Enterprise, they're slowly attacking all the other enterprise silos. But it's a wonderful war going out there on the West Coast, and I think it profits all of us as far as access, as far as capital, as far as capacity, as far as innovation. So we're all benefiting from that.
Yeah, and I think the key there is to make sure that there's obviously clearly enough transparency and enough ability to engage in that competitive landscape that we all like to see in business.
So these are the issues of the universe. Yeah. And forgive me for interrupting, but look, I think we're living through a period of time where what the internet was considered a common carrier in the '96 telecom law, and then all the players on it. And I used to work at AOL. We were just a place where good things could happen.
Sure.
But is Facebook responsible for what happens on Facebook? That's the big argument. Maybe they are, or more responsible than they would argue they have been in the past.
Yes, and also clearly the issue of transparency around what are their intentions around using all this data that they're collecting. So, right. So that's a long conversation.
It's not about who votes; it's about who counts the
votes.
Who
counts the votes?
That's right.
Exactly
Right.
So and to your point about the culture, when I visited Facebook in March, it's true. There is a really clear culture there. We also were at Google. This was a trip that I took with the Quest group at University of Maryland, and it is fascinating, and I do, like you, encourage people to be able to go and learn a little more about what happens in these places. It's very informative. So anyway,
can I tell you a short story?
Yes, tell me a story.
In 1989, I did a deal with Microsoft and went out to Microsoft, and we cut a deal, and there was guys with ponytails, surfboards on tops of Jeeps, the stock going north, everybody's getting rich. In 1999, I'm at AOL, Jeeps with surfboards on top, people with ponytails, stocks going, everybody getting rich. 2009, I'm out in Google walking around with my host, and they're sort of the Googleplex. They're in the middle. And they have one of those giant infinity, this sort of standalone pools with a giant fan, so the water's going one way and you can swim in a small pool, not much bigger than this table. So they have this little tiny mini pool with the fan, and they have a lifeguard sitting up there, and she's in a bathing suit with the white stuff in her nose and the hat and the whistle. But nobody can drown in this pool. So I laughed at my host. I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Well, it's one of our little Google quirks." And I was sitting there thinking, surfboards on Jeeps, ponytails, and rich. I said, okay, so when the Roman generals came back victorious, they used to have people whisper in their ear, "Sic transit gloria mundi," thus passes the glory of the earth. I said, I hope you guys are enjoying it now because it's not going to last forever. And he goes, and I told him about AOL and Microsoft. He said, yeah, but we're different. And I said, that's what they said.
Yeah, that's true.
It's there's always an arc.
It's all.
And Facebook, they have the apartments there now. It's a complete city. It's completely hermetically sealed.
Holy.
It's amazing. And I don't, look, my worry is the bubble.
Yeah.
They live in a bubble.
Yeah.
And we all do to some extent. Here in Washington, D.C., people say we're a bubble, but the technology bubble can be more impactful in many ways than the Capitol Hill bubble here.
It's true, yes, because it's a sort of direct reach to more people in some ways. But
globally.
Globally, that's right. But yeah, fascinating. We should have a whole nother conversation about that. Okay, but let's talk a little bit about disruption because I was looking, you are the chairman of a company called
Genius Rocket.
Yes, that's exactly it. Thank you. And I thought, that's a really cool company because it crowdsources information to help people be able to produce great videos, great messaging,
advertising too.
Advertising. So, and then I thought, wow, this is really interesting. This is a company that potentially could be disrupted by AI, or maybe it's as AI gets better and better at what it's doing, it's going to be more competitive with people in doing these kinds of things. So I was curious what your thoughts are about that. Yeah.
So I spilled a lot of blood in the mud with Genius Rocket in chasing, tilting my Lancet windmills called the advertising agency industry. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And my father was in the advertising agency. He was executive in an ad agency, and I worked in an ad agency in between years in business school. A school I wish I'd gone to called Smith, by the way, just for the record.
Oh, thank you.
But anyway, so I thought the advertising agency business was bloated and cost too much and delivered crappy products. And I was correct, and I am correct. Now, the agency business has migrated to some extent, but the idea of Genius Rocket was there's 25,000 talented videographers around the world, and if you have a cash prize and Procter & Gamble or IBM or Mountain Dew puts up a cash prize, you'll get lots of TV ads. Mm-hmm. And they'll be different. They'll be funky. They'll be, some of them are usable. Many of them are not. And that's what we do, and that's what we did. And your question is, can AI start to generate TV ads?
Yeah.
The answer is we're this far away.
Yeah.
Because what AI does is make up wacky ideas that it thinks make sense.
Sure.
Because it doesn't know what makes sense and what doesn't. And sometimes the most memorable ads are wacky. I mean, for those of you who haven't seen the Old Spice ads with the guy riding the unicorn backwards,
it was so great.
we remember.
Yes.
And the importance of advertising is not just that you remember, but that you talk about it and say it to somebody else. And people do talk about those ads. So AI, I think, is about one click away from actually generating television ads that will look stupendously odd, but you'll go, what the hell was that? And you'll remember the brand. And that's where, I'm not saying ad agencies are going to go out of business because product managers need ad agencies.
Sure.
But it is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, but it gets into this conversation about where jobs will go. I mean, because, just because one technology or something becomes obsolete, it opens usually opportunities for people to do other things or move into other areas. So perhaps in these areas that you're looking at, you've already seen that there are new opportunities for people who have certain skills to do other things than they're doing right now. So instead of sitting and being a video editor, they may emerge as something else. I don't know what
I love that old saw that whenever an industry dies, it opens up a new industry. I'm a little worried that maybe we've reached the end of that equation as well. again, this is one of the scary things about AI or machine learning, or when it's used, it can often replace the types of jobs that used to take people. I mean, a goofy example, and there are many of them, are parking lot attendants. You know, I came here from the dentist, and there used to be a live person in a booth taking my dough. That person's gone. I challenge you just to start paying attention to how fewer live people you see in parking lots.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of parking lots in America. And where do they all go? I have no idea. Now, that's lower level employment with folks that are traditionally would need more schooling and more training and sometimes more a specific skill set to kick up the economic ladder or the skill ladder, so to speak. But there are lots of skill jobs, and you just really touched on one. Video editing, it's really just, it used to be, back in the day, expensive machines, people with splicing and all this stuff, and now it's code, right? So how many jobs are being opened up that don't revolve around code that disruptive jobs or disruptive technologies have replaced? I think the equation is starting to get dangerous. And I'm tossing out some incredible firebombs, I know, but I'm very worried about, let's just one thing, education.
Yeah.
University of Maryland is a fabulous institution. Land-grant university, huge budget, massive outcomes that are fabulous for our nation and our world, incredible technologies, incredible innovation, leadership, everything, right? All good. Are they perfectly tuned for what needs to be done in the next 30 years in higher ed? I have no idea, but I can tell you, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone is sitting there saying, "Yeah, we're good." I don't think Wallace Lowe is sitting at night going, "No problem, we're all set." So talk about disruptive. What does higher education mean? And I don't know if that outcome. I mean, we talk about AI. So is a BA from a great university that teaches critical thinking worth the money? Unclear.
Yeah, it's unclear, and it is a huge struggle. And I think that it's very important to be very involved and engaged with business people, like you, that can help bring a perspective of like, okay, what do I really need? I mean, like, you're growing a company, you're looking for talent. So how can we help understand what should we be teaching students? I mean, what level of knowledge do they need about AI? I mean, clearly someone in computer science might go in very deep, but pretty much everybody needs to know something about particularly AI, because it's such a foundational technology for so many other things, including in medicine, I mean, lots of areas. So, and particularly in the business school.
So my brother's a doctor, and he focuses on palliative care and end-of-life issues. And when Watson came out from IBM, as it turns out, the head of Watson's research, their CTO, is a classmate of mine from college. And he was like, "Mark, wait till you see what it does for healthcare.
Yeah.
It's going to be able to diagnose people better than a human."
Yeah.
Of course, I call my brother, and the first thing he says is, after a string of expletives saying, "How dare I say that?" This is your point. This is the next collision, because in fact, the IBM guy is correct. What it asks a patient has better diagnostic outcomes than a 15-minute visit with a doctor who's on the clock and has to churn through patients because of the payment system. Doctors like this? I can tell you the answer is no. So I don't know. I mean, I know we're bouncing around, but you're right. You almost walk through every single major economic vertical marketplace that matters to our day-to-day lives, be it B2B or business to consumer. And AI writ large is creeping in at edges that is starting to crowd out some of the knowledge bases that professionals in that market are proud about, like doctors.
Yeah, it's just a huge.
I feel like I'm bumming everybody out here. I should probably get a little bit.
No, not at all. I mean, it's something that the higher education really has to come to grips with. And, I think from Maryland's perspective, I do see a lot of interest from the students. They really want to understand where they can come in to this and what they need to do to be prepared for that world that they're going to be walking into. So. But how about you? How did your career path sort of take you into this AI space to really wanting to learn more about this? And what are some of the skills and things that you've developed along the way?
So I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie and a disruption junkie. So I came out of college and I got in the TV business and worked in broadcast television and cable television with HBO, and HBO was changing TV back in the day. We sort of, everybody younger was like, HBO? No, we were the first, free not free, but non-commercial television you paid for, and that was a big deal back in the 80s. Then I got in the internet in '86 before it was even called the internet, and worked for a whole bunch of interesting companies, including AOL, which was in the early '90s, AOL was the it, as they say. So, but I remember the first time I logged on in 1984 to Dow Jones News Retrieval and saw information on a screen that was coming over a phone line, and I remember thinking, okay, I moved from a TV screen to a computer screen, but this is it. This is a big deal, right? Yeah. Information on a screen that's entertaining, that's interactive, that I can control, yada, yada, yada. So I've just played that string all the way out. Now, the internet obviously became a really, really big deal over like a decade and a half. And not that I'm prescient, far from it, but I was sort of like, hey, this is going to be a big deal. Maybe not tomorrow, but at some point. And the first time I heard the term AI and the first time I saw some low-level predictive stuff, I was like, it's going to be a big deal. The first time I met the founder of Fact Squared, where I now am with, he started talking about how he was pulling in speech from people on YouTube, and creating profiles of them, and he started to show how he could predict stuff. And I was like, this is one guy grabbing YouTube videos and analyzing the tension in their voice and rate of speech. I mean, all the stuff that, lie detector tests used to measure. And I thought, this is like, forgive the analogy, but this is like the first time you saw a cheap, crappy digital camera versus the $2,000 SLR that Minolta was trying to jam down your throat. And you're like, the digital does a pretty good job, right? And that one slice right there, the camera business, completely decimated all that used to be with the Kodachrome moments and the SLRs. So I thought, if crappy cheap technology using crappy cheap videos from a crappy cheap channel called YouTube by one guy can do that, where's this go? Where does this go? It's got to go north. Cheaper, right? And this is open and easy and cheap. My three rules of technology. And so AI is just coming up from the bottom. All great technology that has a huge impact on our lives, I would argue, comes from the bottom up. Yeah. Right. I mean, think of e-commerce. E-commerce wasn't driven by major corporations, transferring funds back and forth in some secure digital way. It was you and I going home and logging on and paying bills online with our little bank, and paying our babysitter and paying the house painter and paying our mortgage, and all going, why can't I do this at work? That's all the stuff comes up in the bottom. So I think AI is coming up in some ways from the bottom as much as it is with the giant, Watson and all these big AI things from the big companies. But the bottom is where it's good, where the vitality is going to be.
Tell me, in 20 years from now, how you think your day-to-day will be very different or different because of AI.
So in 20 years, when I go in and buy a car, I'm going to put a little app live in this device, whatever it looks like. I'll put it in my pocket, and I'll walk into the car salesman on the floor, or salesperson, and I'll ask that person a bunch of baseline questions, like, where's your desk? How long you worked here? What kind of car do you drive? Stuff that they would not lie about. Yeah. And I'll get a baseline on their voice, on the timbre of their voice, on their rate of speech, on the types of words they use. Maybe after 5 or 6 baselines, I'll get a little buzz in this phone, meaning I got it. Then I'll start to ask the salesperson about a car I'm interested in. And it'll tell me when that person is nervous. Now, does nervousness mean lying? I don't know. They might be having a bad morning. They might have had a fight with their spouse, whatever. They might have had a fender bender on the way to work. So there's all sorts of reasons they could be nervous or upset. But if the baseline showed them to not be nervous and upset, or the baseline was X and they went to 3X, and I know that, I can start to drill down on that. Moreover, I can excuse myself and go to the restroom, and I can start to look at some of the keywords that I used that made them nervous. So, for instance, when I said, is the mileage number correct? Or how long does it take to recharge? And their answer had some of those keywords, made them nervous. I can keep asking those words, and I can screw around with their head, frankly, and I can really get into their head. And I think you'll see those tools on devices like this start to be used by consumers back and forth in normal conversations. Look at the dating business.
Yeah, that's a great one.
I mean, come on. How many people have gone to a Match.com lunch and wish they'd known beforehand through analysis of the text the person answered and emails and all that, some of the things that they should be wary of. Yeah. Or when the person started to lie about their background, they had some sort of indicator that the conversation had some nervousness that they should be wary of. So we can't hide. We're all open books. We can't change our voice. I mean, the number of people that can actually lie effectively is really like 1 in a million.
Yeah, they're psychopaths.
That's one word for it.
One word for
Sometimes they say politicians, but anyway, the idea of
sometimes they're the same.
Yeah, every now and then. But the idea of transparency and devices and software being available to us in real time to increase that transparency of human interaction with people we know, people we don't know, it's going to get big.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating, and definitely something that can perhaps foster more honest communication, but at the same time, really keep people from falling into traps because of lack of transparency.
So it's going to get worse. Today MasterCard can tell when a man is having an affair. They have hotels being purchased in the same city, and then within 3 hours, flowers being purchased, and then within a week or two of the first hotel being purchased in the same city, that man joining a health club. Right? So these are 3 indicators that are actually almost perfect indicators of the guy having an affair. So what other data points does MasterCard gather about you and I when we use plastic that they can impute and create a conclusion? So can a spouse ask MasterCard for data points about various misbehavior of their spouse and get it from MasterCard? Of course they'll be able to. So I guess the moral of the story is don't do bad things because it's going to find you out.
It's going to find you out, yeah. Which, ideally we want people to live honest, transparent, and ethical lives. So hopefully AI is less of a stick.
I mean, look, I've been in politics long enough. I spent a lot of time in politics, as you probably saw in the background. And I tell people, look, you turn the high beams up on anyone.
Yeah.
Anyone. Yeah. You turn the high beams up on anyone, you're going to find something that can be construed as very disconcerting about them. And I think, one last analogy, I know we're going to wrap up here, is I tell people that, Justice Ginsburg was nominated to the Supreme Court, I think, by George Herbert Walker Bush, and was stepped away from the nomination because he admitted to smoking marijuana. Okay? Then Bill Clinton is president and had to disavow smoking it by making the ridiculous excuse of he didn't inhale. And then Barack Obama runs in 2008, writes a book. He says he did cocaine and smoked dope.
Right.
So the acceptance of behavior, the arc, and it's an age thing too. The arc is going to be more forgiving, but still the arc of transparency and the demand for transparency and the availability of transparency tools to interpret what you are like or what I'm like and what we're saying and all that, it's going to continue. So I think we're going to either have to be way more forgiving of foibles in our past, or people are going to start to have to be stupendously conscious of avoiding behavior that can be tracked.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a great way to end the conversation, Mark. I really appreciate your taking the time, and hopefully we'll have a chance to check in with you again as Facts Squared grows and becomes something that we may all be running into in our daily lives. Even,
for good reasons.
For good reasons, exactly. Okay.
Fear the turtle.
Yeah, fear the turtle. The Ink Tank sponsor, the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets, is dedicated to exploring knowledge about innovative technology that inspires broadly shared prosperity. There's so much more to uncover in the field of artificial intelligence, and we're excited to continue this journey of discovery with you. Thanks to Mark Walsh for talking with me today. Until next time, this is Christina Elson in the Ink Tank.
Subscribe to the Ink Tank on Spotify, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. A special thank you to the Kauffman Foundation for their support. From the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, thank you for joining us in the Ink Tank.